Okay, everyone, I think we can get started. My name is Elizabeth Pendergrass, and I would like to welcome all of you to today's webinar, Is Software Estimation Needed When Cost and Schedule Are Fixed? Before we get started, I'd like to make you all aware of a few technical items. All of you who are listening to the presentation are currently on mute. To ask a question at any point during the presentation, just use the Q&A dialog box shown on the right-hand side of the WebEx screen. Keith will field as many of these questions as he has time for at the end of the presentation. If he does not have time to answer your question, don't worry. I will save all questions we don't get to and refer them to Keith so he can get back to you. Our presenter today, Keith Ciocco, has more than 30 years of experience working in customer service, with 23 of those years spent at QSM. As Vice President, his primary responsibilities include supporting the QSM client base with their software measurement goals, managing business development, and managing existing client relations. He has developed and directed the implementation of the sales and customer retention process within QSM and has played a leading role in increasing the size of its customer base. So without further delay, I'll let Keith get started.
Today. Really appreciate the time. My plan today is to show why estimation is important, even when the cost and the schedules are fixed. I'll also take some time and show some overall best practices with the QSM tools as well. So the idea for this webinar actually started because we were hearing from managers in the Agile world that they were getting pushback regarding estimation. People were saying that they didn't need to estimate because the costs and the schedules were being dictated to them, or because they didn't need some of the processes that were in place and things like that. So I can tell you that estimation still needs to happen. Someone in the organization, someone in the company still needs to know how much the overall release is going to cost and how much the overall portfolio is going to cost. We need to know what we're going to spend next year. We need to know what we're going to spend 2 years from now. And we need to know how long these projects are going to take. Estimation is also important from a communication perspective. Management needs to be on the same page as the development team, and the stakeholders need to know what's going on as well. So estimating helps with all this. We'll cover all of this today. I'll start with a brief background on QSM for those of you who are not familiar with us. So 41 years in business, 41-year anniversary this year. We are mostly known for helping our clients with estimation and project oversight, benchmarking and metrics type of work. We do that through the use of our tools as well as our services. We're also very well known for our SLIM suite of tools. SLIM is an acronym for Software Lifecycle Management, also known as the Putnam model. Larry Putnam Sr. started the company back in the late 70s, and he is and was known as one of the main innovators in the software development world. So going back to the 1970s and 41 years later, here we are. We provide decision-making tools and support so our clients can do a better job of planning and negotiating their project targets. And one really important thing to point out here is we focus mostly on top-down estimation, so a little bit different than some of the other folks that do more granular planning and estimating. We leverage empirically based models, and we leverage historical data, and we leverage industry analytics to figure out, what is the big picture early in the planning process. So even before you hit detailed planning, before you spend a lot of time figuring out how much each individual, how many hours they're going to work, we try to get a big picture estimate first so we don't go down the wrong path. So that's kind of our main focus, top-down, macro-level, metrics-based estimation. How do we do it? Well, we do major research and development. We actually study software projects to analyze relationships in the data. The reason why we do this is so we can do a better job of predicting what future projects are going to cost and how long they're going to take, and will the software work when we deliver it. If you look to the right there on my little slide here, you can see a picture of the QSM Software Almanac. That's our latest almanac, and if you're interested, you could go to qsm.com, and in the resources area on the top right of the homepage, you can click on that and you'd be able to download a free copy of the QSM Software Almanac. The research, all this research that we do, it's collected in the QSM industry database, which is one of the largest databases of its kind. It's got over 13,000 completed projects, and it is one of the main cornerstones of our business here at QSM. It provides the latest information on cost and duration and effort and reliability, all the metrics that we care about in software. It provides the latest information on new technologies, and by studying all this data, it gives us a good understanding of what the fundamental relationships are in software development. People ask me a lot, they say, how do you get all this data? It comes from client relationships, comes from people that we work with and support in our tools support as well as our consulting business. So relationships in the data. One of the biggest relationships we see is what we call the impossible zone. On this chart right here, you can see a little subset of the QSM industry database. You can see a pretty simple relationship. As the projects get bigger, they take longer. You can actually see a little bit of a gradual slope there in the data. And then in big bold red, we've got these words impossible zone. And really, that's what we're trying to help with early on in the planning process. We're trying to help avoid signing up to schedules and budgets that are not realistic. So whether we're doing agile or non-agile, a lot of times we're held to fixed costs and fixed schedules, and a lot of times they're unrealistic, right? So maybe we hit the schedule, but then we don't deliver the work that the customer wants. We don't deliver all of the functionality. So we want to be able to have a way to renegotiate those schedules and budgets, or at least establish them correctly early in the planning process so we can avoid going down the wrong path. So using some of the methods that QSM has, we can see that very early in the planning process. So before we figure out how many hours each person's going to work, we want to know, is this project going to take 3 months or is it going to take 6 months? Do we need 20 people or do we need 40 people? So we want to see all that early so that we make the right decisions. So why is software estimation important even when the cost and schedule are fixed? Well, there's several reasons for this. The number one reason is estimation is not just about numbers. It's about communicating. It's about getting on the same page as the stakeholders. It's about negotiating. It's about communicating effectively so we set the right targets and the right commitments so we don't lose money and time on our software projects. Estimation is also important because we want to be able to validate whether those proposed schedule and budgets are realistic or not. Right, so Agile, Scrum, those are some examples of sometimes when we get fixed costs and budgets. Also, if we're doing proposals, we're doing outsourcing, and we're trying to come up with a price for the software, and then we're held to it. So we want to make sure all that information is estimated correctly early on in the process. We want to make sure we can get the work done within the fixed parameters, right? How many times have we seen, yeah, great, we're on time, but then we don't get all the features delivered. We have to push them off to the next release. So we want to try to make good decisions on that early as well. We want to make sure the software works when we deliver it. So we estimate that. We can estimate reliability early on in the planning process, and we want to manage uncertainty, right? So, with the SLIM tools and with QSM products and methods, we can look at, what's the 50% chance compared to the 90% chance? What if we add people? What if we reduce functionality? Will that really help? And how much money will we save? All this goes towards managing uncertainty so that we don't go down and make the wrong decisions on these targets that we're establishing. The way we carry all this out is with reliable estimation tools, models, methods, processes. This is a little snapshot here of the SLIM suite. I'll go through this briefly and then I'll jump in and show you some examples. But SLIM Estimate is kind of our flagship product. Basically, it lets us figure out, what should this project cost? How long should it take? What's the reliability going to be like? What's the risk? Let's look at all the trade-offs. Let's make the right decision. SLIM Data Manager comes with it. It provides us the ability to capture historical data, build our own repository of historical projects so that we can learn from it. We can learn from all the work we're doing. Master plan is for portfolio level estimating, right? So maybe we have a group of projects. Maybe I'm a director of software development. Maybe I'm a CIO and I need to know how much I'm going to spend next year. I need to match my demand with my capacity, right? Those types of analysis is completed with master plan. Slim control lets us track the project, but more than that, it actually acts as, it's almost like a GPS for our software project. It lets us re-baseline when things change, and it actually runs forecasts to completion, provides dashboards of plans and actuals, and then lets us estimate midway through the project. Slim metrics is for once the project's completed. We can do process improvement type of analysis. We can compare ourselves to other people in our industry. We can see where we're strong and where we need to improve. That's Slim metrics. And then Slim Collaborate is our software as a service model, web-based estimation and portfolio analytics. So that's kind of a summary of the full Slim suite of tools. They're easily calibrated, they're fully customizable, and they include industry data, industry trends, so that when you run estimates, you can sanity check, right? So we have industry data in Agile and non-Agile and all different types of application domains. So let's go ahead and show how we can help here, how we actually can carry this through. Open up the estimation tool here, and you can see the analysis area here of the estimation tool. If I go to the Tools menu, you can actually see every tool in the suite. Let's start with the Data Manager. Now this is, capturing historical data is a best practice that we promote very actively here at QSM. It's really important, if you can, to try to pull some historical data together. In fact, Larry Putnam, the gentleman I mentioned earlier in the presentation, right? He's written a number of books on this, right? He's actually taught us how to streamline based on core metrics within software, right? And so we're going to kind of focus on that here. In fact, he wrote a book called 5 Core Metrics, written by Larry Putnam. So if we open up the tool here, we can see multiple tabs. The most important tab is really the basic information here. This is where we would capture how big the project was. Now remember, this is a completed project. And this is in function points, but this can be in whatever size metric we feel comfortable with, or a combination of measures. So this could be user stories, it could be story points, it could be features, it could be SLOC, it could be function points, it could be use cases, it could be high-level business requirements. So totally flexible. The idea here is to capture a little bit of historical data and to include sizing with that information. And then we want to capture how long the project took, duration, and then how much effort was spent. Once we have these 3 measures, we can calculate what we call a productivity index, or a PI for short. The productivity index is a measure of efficiency. It really encapsulates the overall project environment. It takes into account things like complexity of the software, tools and methods you might be using, experience level of the people, that type of thing, that type of information. And the beauty of it is it's mathematically calculated. Once we know how much work was delivered and how long it took and how much effort was spent, we can calculate your project's productivity index, right? So if you're doing in-house projects, or if you're doing outsourcing, if you're using Slim, every one of your projects will have a productivity index associated with it. Now we could go into a lot of detail here. You can capture detailed metrics on application type and sizing information and labor rates. You can create as many custom metrics as you would like. We absolutely focus a lot on reliability estimation and capturing defects. We can break them out by severity category. We can even track how far off you were from your estimate. Were you 5% off? Were you 20% off? Because we can leverage all this information going forward. Once we start estimating, we can take into account that we were 5 or 10% off the next time we run an estimate. So we want to capture all this data if we can. Now, a lot of people think you need loads of data, you need hundreds of projects, but you don't. As long as, if you have 1 or 2 projects, great. If you have a handful, that's even better. If you have a few projects, we can go a long way with that. Now, if you don't have any historical data, that's okay too. We would lean more on the industry analytics, and then we would use the ability to manage the risk within the Slim model to compensate for that. And I'll show you some examples as we go through. So capturing historical data, definitely a best practice we want to focus on if we can, and we want to focus on the core measures, size, time, and effort, so we can calculate this productivity index. I'm going to go back to the estimating tool. Now, we can leverage all that history here. If I click on the history button, you could load that history in, and then we can use that to help us make better decisions. So let's take a look at this chart here for a second. Now, these triangles that you see are those projects that you've captured in the Slim Data Manager. Those would be your projects that you've completed, or they can be estimates that you're actually in the process of running. The blue data point is the estimate that I've already run here. And by the way, I'm showing you the outputs first and kind of showing you the big picture, but I'm actually going to take you through some estimates from scratch here in a minute. But I wanted to just give you a feel for some of the analytics here to give you a better understanding of the overall process. So this estimate here is, I'm feeling pretty good about it. This is for duration. You can see duration on the vertical, and you can see the trend line here. This is the industry average for the latest Agile projects. So as soon as I run an estimate, even before I do any detailed bottom-up planning, before I open up a very big spreadsheet with a lot of information, before I open up a Microsoft project or any other type of tool, more granular tools, I want to get the big picture. I want to see how I'm doing here. So this estimate here I'm pretty comfortable with because it's consistent with my industry trend line. It's also consistent with my own historical projects. Right? So remember that slide I showed that showed the impossible zone? So if this is one of my estimates down here, if someone's trying to get me to commit to a schedule that's, 3 months, if I put the crosshairs down, you can see it's a little less than 2 months, 2 months. If someone's trying to get me to commit to an estimate down here, that's what I was describing as the impossible zone. And believe it or not, this is where a lot of software development teams live. They will sign up to, unfortunately, they'll sign up to a schedule that's 2 or 3 months when they really should be allowing for 9 or 10 months or something like that. So we're uncovering that early here with the Slim tools. And a lot of times with Agile, we're held to a fixed schedule way down here. And then what happens is the customer's not happy because we don't deliver all the functionality that they want, right? So great, yeah, we feel good because we got the schedule done, but did the customer get what they needed? And usually not. And we're going to deal with more of that too during the webinar as well. I'm going to show some examples. So this is that impossible zone down here, and we want to be close to the trend line. We want to be close to our own historical data as we go forward with some of our planning. Now, if I look to my left here, you can see a navigator. This navigator actually has views that describe an estimate that I've already run. And again, I'm going to walk you through the start of these estimates as well. But I wanted to explain a little more here. Now, this view that I'm looking at right here, this is an example of an Agile Scrum project, right? So we've got kind of a box-shaped staffing profile. We're ramping up to 8 people. You can see it on the vertical there. And we're delivering this in 10 sprints, right? Pretty familiar. If I look to the bottom of the chart of the screen here, you can see that this estimate is telling me for about 4.5 months, about 6,700 person hours of effort, and it's going to cost me about $1 million to deliver this release. Remember, I'm at the release level here, not the sprint or not the very granular level. I'm looking at the big picture. Okay. If I look to my right, I've got a risk gauge. This risk gauge tells me the chances I have of success. So Slim's saying 4.5 months, but I wanted to get done. I initially told Slim my target was 4 months, and it's telling me here that that's probably not going to happen. It's about a 4% chance of me hitting 4 months. Much more likely 4.7 months with this $1 million cost. And then if I look to my left, I've got a control panel, and this control panel, excuse me, is going to allow me to look at different trade-offs, like what if I add people, or what if I reduce functionality, things like that. And I'm going to go more into detail that in a few minutes. But this is a Scrum example. Now, if I wanted to, I could also set this up for more of a waterfall scenario, right? Here you've got the staffing profile. This is the more traditional waterfall where we've got kind of a gradual ramp up of people and then a gradual tailoring off of people. And we've got the key phases here. I've got the concept phase, requirements and design, build and test, and then deploy. And then similar analysis is the last screen. I've got the summary of the estimate, the risk assessment, the control panel on these views that go into more detail. So we can set this up for whatever type of software project you're working on. Now that I've kind of shown you the big picture, let's show some ways that we can approach an estimate. Now you can approach the estimate from different angles based on the information you have available. Okay, so I would go over here to the estimate, and then I have some options here. I can start very high level, or I can start more detailed. Let's go with the ROM example here, rough order of magnitude. Here I'm assuming I don't have a lot of information. Now, a lot of times I'll talk to my Agile clients and they'll say, oh, that's actually, I don't need to do this right now because, this particular project, we're estimating this in story points. Or I don't need to do this right now because, I've got my detailed plan in my spreadsheet. Okay, so that's different than this. So what we're doing is we're taking the big picture first, right? We're going to see, in fact, we could put our number of story points into Slim and let Slim calculate the effort and the cost, right? So we're going to look at the release level here, and we're going to leverage your story point information. That's why Agile is so great. It's got, Agile produces a ton of sizing information, which we love because we can leverage that sizing information when we're doing parametric estimating. So I'm going to go ahead and show some examples here. ROM estimate, here's what I would put into Slim to generate an estimate. Put in the name of the project, and you can see it's an Agile project. I'm going to set this up for the phases that I want to include, and you can see the typical Agile types of phase names here. I've got release planning, story writing, development, and implementation as one example. And these names can be changed, right? Remember, this is customizable. Put the start date in, and then I'm going to tell Slim what kind of application it is that I'm working on. And I don't want to gloss over this too quickly because this is really important right here. We're actually leveraging knowledge bases. We're actually leveraging industry data here. When I click on these Agile projects, it's bringing in the typical cost and schedule and effort numbers from my Agile database here, from actual Agile projects where we have complete information, sizing and duration and effort and productivity. All that comes into play here when I choose this option. The same would happen if I was working with one of my avionics clients or somebody working on process control. So I choose the application type, brings in all that industry analytic information. Then I'm going to tell Slim, is this a big project or a small project? So what we're really doing here is we're doing t-shirt sizing, right? We're kind of using our feeling of, okay, it's small based on what we normally do. It's medium. Now, this isn't stories, but this could say features. It could say, whatever we're using, function points. And right now we're leveraging the QSM database, the typical small project, right, in the QSM database. But this could be tailored for you as well. We can customize this to your historical data, your sizing information, so that it's defined by how you define small, medium, or large. Then I'm going to put in that productivity index, right? Remember I said that was important. That's that measure of efficiency that we calculate using historical data. Now, in this example, we're assuming I don't have any of my own historical data. We're using the QSM database. Now, remember that QSM database has thousands of projects. So QSM knows what the industry averages are for productivity, right, on all different types of projects. So we're going to leverage that experience here. And then I would run the estimate. I'd hit next, and then I could decide, is what's more important? Do I want the best possible schedule or the best possible cost? And I'd answer another question or two, and then I'd run the model. Now, that's one example. Another approach might be this time box approach. So let's figure that, I'm an Agile group, and, I'm doing Scrum, and, they've already told me what my schedule and my budget is. So, right, some people might say, oh, why do I need to estimate? I already know. Okay, let's go through that now. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say, okay, name of my project, phases, start date, same as before. And I'm going to choose that application type. And again, I'm going to bring in all that information, that valuable information from all the research. And then the PI is going to populate for me here. It's either going to be based on my own historical data or it's going to be based on industry data. Then I'm going to tell Slim, what the fixed cost and schedule is, right? Either effort, cost, or if I don't know that, maybe it's the people. Maybe I'm being told, okay, Keith, you're the project manager or I'm the Scrum Master and all I have is 8 people. Do what you can. Tell me how long it's going to take with 8 people. That's it. I hit finish. It runs the model. Within seconds, it generates an estimate, and it brings me back to this analysis area where I can dive in, right? And right off the bat, it's going to tell me whether that fixed cost and schedule are realistic or not. And here we go. So it's realistic, it's good, it's reliable, it's consistent with what we've done before, it's consistent with what the trends say. I'm feeling comfortable right now. It's showing me, now it's telling me 4.5 months. I wanted to get done in 4. It's telling me that's probably not going to happen, right? But it gives me the ability to look at trade-offs, right? So let's say, okay, great, 4.7 months. I'm not comfortable with that. I want to get done in 4 months. Well, what if we add another Scrum team to the mix? Let's do that. I can come in here and I can say, okay, great, let's add another Scrum team. Will that help me? Now, if I'm using a spreadsheet, that spreadsheet might give me good news, right? Spreadsheets are deal in very linear types of environments, right? Adding people might say, great job. It might tell me good news. But when I use Slim, now Slim is going to deal with all those non-linearities that happen in software. It's going to deal with all that complexity that happens, right? So let's hit OK, and we're going to run the model with a bigger team with 2 Scrum teams instead of 1, and it brings me here, and it gives me a new estimate within a couple seconds. If I had run that through a spreadsheet, I'd still be working on it, right? I might work on it for a couple hours, but in Slim, it gave it to me quickly. That's the beauty of these parametric models. Telling me, okay, great, I'm going to save a couple weeks. Instead of delivering in 10 sprints, I'm going to deliver in 8.5 sprints. It's going to take me about 4 months. I'm almost to my goal, but look how much more money it's going to cost. I'm jumping up to $1.8 million here. And now I can make a decision. Do I want to do that? That's what I meant before about communication vehicle. Now I'm sitting down with the customer, or I'm sitting down with my boss, or I'm sitting down with my team or my Scrum Masters, and I'm saying, okay, are we all in agreement here? Is this worth the money? Right? I'm talking to the stakeholders now. Do they want to spend the money? Is it worth saving 2 weeks? Okay, so, and I might log that. I might keep it. I might call that my my extra Scrum team. Right? I'm going to save it. Now, another option might be, instead of adding people, I might want to reduce functionality or look at one of those trade-offs. Or I might want to answer the question, everything's fine, 4.5 months, great. I'm going to live with that. How much more is it going to cost when I start bringing all that work in from the backlog? So when I come in here, I could say, okay, great. Quickly, I can answer that question and say, okay, here's how much, when I add all that work in from the backlog, I hit okay, boom. Within a couple seconds, I've just run a whole new estimate with all of that added into the scenario. And now it's telling me it's going to be almost 6 months. It's going to cost me this much more money. Instead of delivering in 8 sprints, it's going to be 12.5 sprints. Right? So now I can make a decision. I can see up front now what it's going to cost to add all those extra features. So, right, pretty quick analysis. I can sanity check with the industry data to make sure I'm comfortable. Okay, now, those are some examples of looking at trade-offs and approaching the estimate from a couple different angles. Let's say that I have more detail going in. Okay, I'm still on an agile project here, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put in my I've got the opportunity to actually tailor these models here, these staffing profiles, right? So I can actually go into detail there. I can go into more detail on the sizing. So instead of just putting 300 stories, I could say, okay, well, how many, let's break them out by complexity. I've got this many small ones, this many average ones, this many complex ones, or I've got this many small features, I've got this many average features. So I can decompose the system if I want into more detail. I'm going to put in that productivity index. I'm going to get it from my historical data, or I'm going to get it from my industry database. And by the way, I can tell Slim if I'm not really sure about that productivity index. I'm going to use a range here to build in that buffer for planning purposes. I'm going to tell Slim if I'm not really sure about this size estimate. Use a range. Then I'm going to make a decision. Do I want to run an estimate based on the industry data, or do I want to run an estimate based on some type of fixed parameter? Maybe all I care about is getting this thing done in 6 months, or maybe I have multiple constraints. So you can see we've got a lot of different ways that we can approach the estimate, and we can quickly assess what's reasonable and what's not. And then the tools will actually break out the detail for me. In fact, here we are. So this is in addition to telling me, 6 months with 10 people, it's going to say, okay, here's how much I'm going to spend in management, testing, development, right? Here's the effort by role by month, and all this toggles to a report. And so I can, if I want to, I can export out this out to a spreadsheet or some other types of tools, more detailed tools, more granular tools. Now, this estimate here, let's go back for a second. The initial estimate that I've run, let's say that's my 50% solution, right? 4.5 months, $1 million. If I have the luxury, I'll run another estimate again. Once I get more into the project. If it's more of a waterfall project, I'll go ahead and I'll run another estimate again when I get into high level design, maybe a third one when I get into detailed design. Right? So I'm flexible here. If I don't have that luxury, what I can do right now is I can run what we call a contingency plan. And this goes back to those comments I made about managing uncertainty. And remember, all this is happening before I figure out how much each individual person, how many hours they're working. I'm looking at the release level estimate. So I'm just going to go ahead and open my contingency plan up here, and I'm going to say, okay, give me the schedule and the budget that I've got a 90% chance of hitting. When I put in those percentages and I hit next, runs the model for me again and gives me another estimate, gives me a more conservative estimate, added a little more time and effort for me for planning purposes. So it's telling me 5 months now with a little more money and a couple more people. And I might log this just as a communication factor. Say, okay, this is going to be my 90% shot. When all is said and done, maybe I condition my customer to this. I'm doing a proposal or something like that. Maybe I condition the internal development team to the 50% solution, which was this. The quicker schedule. So I try to work to a quicker schedule, but I condition my customer with a little bit of buffer built in. And then, of course, it'll break everything out for me. It breaks out the cost per sprint. It breaks out the velocity. It tells me how many stories per sprint that I can deliver. And it tells me how many sprints I'm going to deliver. And it lets me look at different trade-offs like, okay, well, how much, can I get it done in 8 sprints, and how much more would that cost? Things like that. Now, once I generate a release level estimate, I might want to look at the portfolio, right? Especially if I'm a director or senior level manager. I want to know how much I'm going to spend within my group of projects, or I want to know how much I'm going to spend next year. So this would be my portfolio here. You can see I've got them broken out by different groups. So I've got, I've got a group called workflow. I've got a group of package implementations, back office projects. I've got my transformation programs. Now the gray bar here is a summary for the cost and the schedule of all of my group projects within the workflow there, packages here. Each of these blue bars represents a task or a release estimate. Right? Because I looked at all those independently. Now I'm rolling them up at a portfolio level. And right off the bat, I can take a look at the risk. Right? Because sometimes when we're running estimates at a release or project level, that project or release level estimate might look great by itself. But when I start comparing it to my overall portfolio, maybe not so good. So in this example, I've got these bubble charts, right? And I've got the green box in the middle, which gives me my comfort zone. This is where I've finished before. This is what I've achieved in the past, typical cost and schedule and this is actually productivity that I've achieved previously using that productivity measure again. But this could say cost and schedule as well. And when the project estimates are in that center box, I'm feeling good because they're consistent with what I've done in the past. Now, these projects over here are hanging out, right? These bubbles right here are project estimates. And These on the top left were estimated too aggressively. We assumed too high of a productivity, and therefore they're coming out with the estimates were too short of a schedule to feel comfortable with. Probably are not going to achieve those. Maybe they look good by themselves, but when we compare it to the portfolio, brings the whole portfolio down a little bit. If I look to my bottom right, these projects here were estimated not aggressive enough. We assumed too low of a productivity. Maybe we didn't use our historical data on these. Maybe somebody handed me a spreadsheet on these or something like that, or maybe we just didn't take a close enough look at it. And so these schedules were estimated as too long based on what we normally do. Right? So we can see right up front now what, kind of a big picture, really big picture view, and then we can make adjustments. So we could come over here and say, okay, at a macro level and say, well, maybe we need to reallocate some of our resources, to make the whole portfolio hit. Maybe we need to, change some of our decisions on how much work we need to deliver per release, things like that. And then in addition to that, we can look at these spend and staffing views, right, at the portfolio level. Let's look at staffing for a second. So here we've broken this out by role, by month. You can see they're color-coded. I've got developers and analysts and tech leads and architects. You can see the gradual ramp up of people at the portfolio level, all my projects combined, and when we start, when they start becoming available again as we go down the curve here. Now let's look at developers for a second. Purple spaces here, right? Purple bars. Now this is telling me here that we're going to need to ramp up to about 225 developers. If we only have 200 on staff, that's a red flag, and we need to reassess. Right? So that's what these tools do. They let us make sure that our demand matches our capacity. So if our demand estimates are telling us we need 225 developers and we only have the capacity to provide 200, we're in trouble. These are the kind of tools that let us see, what's going to happen in the future. And if someone challenges me on it, I can say, look, this is based on historical data. These are based on empirical models based on our latest Agile projects. These are based on our latest Agile projects. And then we can see again, when they start becoming available if we want to reallocate. That's staffing. We've got all kinds of views here. We've got spending, and here's the effort by role by month. And by the way, again, they all toggle to a report. So if I want to bring this out to a spreadsheet to do some additional detailed analysis, I can do that. Go back to the risk for a second. Remember these projects that were hanging out. I made some changes, right? So when I make those changes, we reassess and all the views update automatically till we feel comfortable going forward. Now that's the estimation part of this, right? Portfolio and release. Once we feel comfortable with our estimate, then we're going to want to track it. Okay, and that's where we bring in Slim Control. This is what I referred to as my GPS for my software project, right? My boss actually gave me that comparison. I like it because it really speaks a lot to what this tool does. A lot of times when we start and we generate an estimate, things change on the project, and we need to adapt and reforecast and come up with a new estimate, and that's what we do here. So what we're looking at here is a dashboard of plans and actuals, right? So I've got the Gantt charts and the features and the defects. So we're looking at all the metrics I care about. And let's look at features for a sec. The thin red line that you see there was my initial baseline plan from Slim Estimate. Now, once a month, I'm putting in my actuals now. I'm putting in the totals. So I don't need a lot of detail here. Just once a month or every couple of weeks, I'm putting in the total people that worked on the project, the total features that were delivered. You can, if you like stories better, you can use stories or epics or whatever you feel comfortable with. Defects are huge, right? Remember I was saying, sometimes in Agile, we focus a lot on cost and schedule, but we want the software to work when we deliver it, and we want to be able to deliver full functionality. So this helps us with this. So we put in the basics once a month. And that's what we see here. And we can see in this example that the yellow light's on. Caution, right? It's bringing to the attention to us that we're in trouble. We're probably not going to finish. And by the way, this is good with in-house projects, but it's also huge with outsourcing. So, vendor comes in, we choose a vendor using Slim Estimate, let's say. We evaluated all the bids. One vendor came in at $1 million and 6 months. Another vendor said $2 million and 18 months, right? We used Slim to figure out which one was more competitive. We choose the vendor. Now we're going to track them. So this can be in-house or outsourcing, vendor management. And so, I'm looking at the vendor here. He's fallen off the pace here. And now we're in trouble. So we go back and we're negotiating now with the vendor. And we look at this, take a closer look, and we say, okay, well, they had planned on 508 features. That's what they planned to deliver. And right now they've delivered about 394 features. Okay, so they're falling behind. They promised me that they were going to charge me $2 million. They've already overspent. They're already up to $2.1 million. So what Slim Control does is it takes the actual work delivered and the actual effort spent and the actual duration elapsed, and it recalculates this productivity index. Remember I told you earlier in the presentation how important this number is. So we're calculating their productivity index as we go, and we can see if they're achieving what they had promised. So even if the vendor didn't know what a productivity index was coming in, they're still going to have to provide you with a cost and a schedule, right? A budget. So you're going to know what their productivity index is, and then they will learn, right, as they go. They're going to start seeing, okay, they're using this productivity index to manage, to monitor my progress here. So they're only achieving a 14.5, and that's why they're falling behind in this example. Now, we hit the forecast button, and it curve fits to the actuals, and it runs a new projection. And now we can see everything. We can see not only the other metrics, but we can see the schedule. We can see that, wow, they really are falling behind. So they had planned on finishing here, and this is where they are now in time with the red bar. And the green bar is telling us the new estimate. This is when they're going to finish. So they're going to be late. So instead of delivering, and by the way, these are sprint lines. Instead of delivering it within 13 sprints, it's going to take them a couple extra sprints to deliver. It's going to, again, cost more money, and it's going to be late. So what are we going to do about it? So we'll go over here and we'll look at some trade-offs. Now the vendor might say, hey, don't worry, we'll add some people and everything will be fine. Right? So let's take a look at that for a second. So we started with, in this example, we started with 27 people, and let's add some people here. And within seconds, I've got the impact of that. And great. Okay, it's going to save about 2 weeks, and it's going to cost me a lot more money. Right? It's going to go from $5.5 million to $6.8 million. That's a problem. Now, to me, that's a problem. It might not be a problem, but at least now we have it. We're communicating. We've got it all on the table. We can talk to the vendor. We can tell them, vendor can talk to us and say, hey, here's one of our options. Do we want to consider this? Because we will get it done on time. It's going to cost more money, though. Right? So that's an option. Another option might be reduced functionality or something like that. So lots of trade-offs we can look at. When I hit OK, what it does is it updates all the views, and it still shows that we're going to be late. It shows the ramp up of people and the ramp up of cost, right? And by the way, will it work when we deliver it? Not looking too good, right? So there's a red flag as well. So we're finding a lot more defects than we had planned initially. So we really need to take a second look at this particular scenario here. So tracking, so estimating, getting the right plan, tracking based on all the changes, based on those. In fact, we can use Slim Control when we're pulling from the backlog. We can see the updates and how many more sprints it's going to take. We can see a regular analysis view every couple weeks to see how the project's doing, which fits beautifully with Agile because it's so iterative. And but not only that, we can see the reliability, and we can see if we're delivering the amount of functionality that we promised. And we can make decisions. We can adapt. Now, once the project's completed, all of that information goes back here to that data manager that we started with. So all that historical data here, how big was it? Remember, how long did it take? How much effort? What was the actual productivity index? And this way we can use this information the next time we evaluate a vendor, the next time someone comes to us with a Scrum an agile program that's got a fixed price or a fixed cost, or even on a traditional project, we just want to know, is it going to finish on time? How much is it going to cost? Open-ended, right? We can leverage this information the next time. We can figure out what our productivity index is to make sure it's consistent, and we can make sure we can deliver this amount of work going forward. So the answer to the question of, is estimating important when cost and schedule are fixed? Absolutely. It gives us the ability to negotiate, communicate. It gives us the ability to validate, and it gives us the ability to really leverage industry analytics, right? We want to see how we compare to other people doing the type of software that we're doing, and it gives us a repeatable, consistent process to follow over and over again that we can teach new people when they come in, that we can apply to all of our vendors to bring consistency across our organization. And that concludes my presentation today, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Keith. We've already got a few really good questions. First one, considering mature products, how is maintenance effort accounted for in estimates? And in parentheses, legacy quality issues, technical debt, etc. So
maintenance projects would be handled in a similar way. There's a couple ways to approach it, actually. We can estimate the maintenance of a project as part of the overall life cycle. So, and I'd be happy to address this one-on-one as well. Feel free to call me or send me an email offline. I'm happy to actually take you through some examples. But maintenance is dealt with as part of the overall life cycle, as part of the overall main build, right? It's calculated as part of the overall equation. But we can also address maintenance as its own project, and we could set up a separate template for that, and we can deal with all the additional costs using master plan, so we can actually enter in independent costs that might not be directly related to the software development process, but might be related directly to the organization in other ways, and we can bring that in and integrate that in with the master plan functionality within SLIM. I hope I can answer that in more detail offline. I'd probably want to take you through it and actually show you some examples. Yeah. And ask you a couple more questions, to kind of hit that right, target that a little more specifically for you.
Okay, this one was when you were showing SLIM estimate, and it was earlier on, I remember. So the question was, in your Agile example, the duration on the risk gauge is at 0%. Can you explain? So
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, so the risk gauge is just showing us what chance we have of getting of being successful. So if the risk gauge was close to 0%, that just means that the target schedule that we were hoping for has a very low probability of success. And what we'd want to do there is look at different trade-offs and try to figure out, how can we get that schedule in a more comfortable zone, where we can feel comfortable quoting it or planning it. But the risk gauge just shows the chances that we have of achieving what the constraints were.
Okay.
Yeah, pretty straightforward answer there for you. Again, happy to take it offline and show you some examples as well. Yeah.
Okay, I guess this is a follow-up question. It said the solution shown appeared acceptable.
Okay, that's probably because the goals that I probably had the constraint set at a very low threshold, right? So because maybe 60% was all I cared about. As long as I feel comfortable, as long as I have a 60% chance of achieving the schedule, I'm okay with this as long as I hit my budget. And that's probably why it was probably in the green, because I probably set an acceptable standard as 60%. So you can customize that for your acceptable standards, right? So maybe there, all I cared about was getting the budget. So maybe I needed a 90% assurance of budget, but only a 60% of schedule. So those are user calibrated. You can set that up however you want.
Okay, that answers the question. What is staffing shape?
The staffing shape is just how you allocate resources to a project. So I had mentioned earlier, with the waterfall example, that's more traditional, where we're gradually adding people onto a project and then we're gradually tailoring off. Whereas the box shape that I showed was more of a Scrum example, where we have 8 people going from start to finish. So you can actually set those staffing profiles based on how you would allocate people to a project within your organization. So it's just the rate at which you're putting people on a project, and whether you have the same amount going from start to finish, or if you're adding people at certain points in time. Good questions.
Can you see the impact of adding another Scrum team?
Yes. So I showed the. So great question. So when you add, there was a view. I hesitate to go back just because I didn't want to run out of time, but there was a view in the tool where you could, that control panel, and you can actually click on that and say, okay, I want to add a certain number of people. And then as soon as you hit OK, you run the estimate again. It'll run the estimate with the bigger team size. So you can specify how many people on your Scrum team. I think in the example, I went from 8 to 16 people. I added 1 Scrum team. I assumed the Scrum team was 8 people. So you can actually tailor that as well. But it gives you quick analysis. You can quickly put in, an added number of people. And I think I explained that the benefit to that was, like if I'm doing if I'm using a detailed spreadsheet or something like that, I'd have to go back through all those cells and add all that information. But with Slim, it quickly assesses and runs the model and brings me to those charts that show whether it's good or bad.
How would you estimate the cost of added work from the backlog?
Similar situation. I would go to that control panel and I would just, there's another button that lets you add functionality. So, I could say, in fact, in the example, I think I went from 200 to 300 stories, and I was just assuming that that's how many I wanted to bring over, how much work I wanted to bring over from the backlog. So you can specify how much work you want to, you want to evaluate the cost of the added work. You can specify how much that is, and then the Slim model will calculate that for you.
Oh, great tools with amazing views. Thanks. We believe we have found a way to assess a current team. Have you seen that elsewhere? Can you tune your estimate to show, for example, a very elite team?
First of all, thanks for the compliment. We love to hear that feedback. And yes, absolutely. You can tailor the model based on experience level of the people and based on the success that a particular team has had. And that would mostly be customized within the productivity index. In fact, you can actually take PIs from your historical data from projects, where you had a more experienced team, and you can see what their PIs are and use those for the future estimate. And if you're a real knob tuner and you like to go down into detail, you can actually go in and answer some questions about your particular team, and you can tune the model that way. So yes, absolutely, the model will be adjusted based on how successful a team has been in the past, if you want to set it that way.
What software application types do you support?
So we support all software application types, and I might have shown a couple examples where I pulled down the trend views. But anywhere from full engineering and avionics and real time, all the way up to custom web development and package implementations. So anybody that spends a lot of money in software would be fine using our tools, and it doesn't matter what application domain. It's all the above. Any type of software. We even branch out into some infrastructure types of projects, as well as other types of design processes. Yeah, but software is our sweet spot, and we support all of the above.
Do you integrate to other project management tools?
Yes, we do. So we integrate to Actually, there's a very robust API that's built into Slim that enables you to interface to a lot of other tools. And there's actually automation built to multiple PPM tools in the form of a framework that's customizable, and we have direct push button integration to the Microsoft Office suite, Excel. So really any tool that can bring Excel in, right? In fact, we import from Excel directly as well in the sizing area. Microsoft Project, fully automated, CAPPM, to name a couple, but we can tailor to a lot of different types of tools based on the API that's built into Slim. Also, a lot of agile tools as well, like tools like Jira and tools like that. We have an API that we can customize.
Can you generate estimates by role?
Yes, absolutely. So, the initial estimates that I showed during the webinar were release level, project level, but Slim will actually, Slim is template based. So you can open up a template. For example, if you're doing a package implementation, you would go to Slim, open up a template that says package implementation, and then you can build your own or just use that. You could also go to a template that represents something different. It might be a web-based application or something like that. So you would open up the template, and then in the template, there's an environment area. And within the environment area, there's a very robust area that you can actually specify resource percentages and, like how much money you typically on a percentage basis spend by phase, right? And so Slim will break out that overall estimate on a percentage basis based on the information you give it. And it comes with templates already built, so it automatically breaks the effort by role by month out based on the tool's templates, but you can tailor those for you. So yes, absolutely, that's a big part of what we do. We can run estimates, effort by role by month, kind of like I showed in the demo. It's got a very robust engine that shows the breakout of estimates. Not only that, but it'll break out the velocity, it'll break out the cost per sprint. So it breaks the estimate out into detail for those of you that like to see detailed analysis.
That's great. I think we have time for just a couple more questions. So, yeah, if you have any additional questions and we don't get to them, just know we will follow up with you. And feel free to use the contact information that Keith has up here if you have any questions after the webinar. Can you use Slim on outsourced projects too, or just in-house?
Great question. So both. So, basically, if you're doing in-house development and you just need to know, your project manager needs to communicate with the stakeholders and they need to know what this project should cost and how long it takes, perfect fit. If you want to use Slim to evaluate vendor bids, the estimating tool, right? You have multiple vendors, maybe 2 or 3, maybe a lot. One vendor's coming in saying, hey, it's going to cost you $1 million and it's going to take 6 months and I'm going to staff it up to 8 people. Another vendor's telling you something totally different. You can run their bids through Slim and you can bounce them off the industry trends to see if they're realistic. And if you've done work with the vendor in the past, you can have their historical data in that data manager, and their historical data will show up on the scatter plots, and you'll be able to see what their productivity index is. That's in the front end, right? When you're trying to decide on a vendor. And then once you choose a vendor, you can use that Slim control tool that I showed and actually track and monitor the vendor. And you can see if they're falling off the plan, right? And then if you want to, as you get into the project, you can run a forecast to complete. So in other words, you're going to run another estimate and you can see where they're going to be. And then you can make decisions and again, use the tools to communicate effectively and with the vendor so they can get back on track and so you don't lose money, hopefully, and so you both feel good on both sides of it. So yeah, absolutely, in-house and vendor fully supported.
Okay, last question. How do you get the data for your industry database?
Great question. I get asked that a lot. And I'm always proud to say that we get it from working with our clients. So we have a lot of partnerships with our customers, and a lot of them like to see themselves reflected in those trend lines that I showed today. And it's actually a big advantage, right? Because we don't just put something on our website and say, hey, can you fill out a form? And we don't know the people and we don't know the data and we don't know if it's consistent or complete. So we go through a very strict validation process with all the research data that we do. And we actually have interviews with the clients, and it's people that we support and we have relationships with. And so that's a huge advantage, and it's really the cornerstone of our business is the partnerships we have with our clients, and we value them tremendously. And we feel like we have great partnerships with our customers. We've been around a long time, and we cherish those relationships. So it's from client relationships that we get all the historical data.
Great. Well, thank you, Keith, and thank you, everybody, for participating in the discussion and attending the webinar today. If you came in late or if you want to see the replay, we will have a replay available. I'll send an email with a link to that as soon as we have that up on our website. And we'll also have the slides available for download. So thanks again, Keith, for presenting today, and stay tuned, everyone, for future webinars from QSM.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and thanks everybody for joining us today. Really appreciate it.